So Manzanar has been on our list to visit for a number of years. We drove by it at one point a couple of years ago. I think it was during when COVID was just upon us and we weren't able to get into the grounds because the grounds were closed, but we finally were able to get into the site when the visitor center was open. Okay, arrived at a place that's been on our list for, I think, a long time, in our home state of California, but have never been here. Today we're at Manzanar Historic Site.
Yes, and it's quite large, quite sprawling. We're going to start in the visitor area and see if we can maybe get a map so we can take a look at what's available.
Yep. Now, Manzanar does come from the Spanish word for apple orchard, but that's not really what this place is famous for. It is the most famous of nearly 10 Japanese-American internment camps during World War II, and you're going to find this site located on Highway 395, just a little bit north of Lone Pine, California. It's the best preserved such camp, and today the United States National Park Service maintains it and oversees its restoration.
We walked through a time in history where over 10,000 people of Japanese ancestry were interred here starting in 1942. President Franklin Roosevelt issued an executive order that applied to certain individuals who were German and Italian, but the order extended to all people of Japanese ancestry living on the West Coast. And this approach wasn't limited in the United States. Canada also passed an order which authorized the relocation of every person of Japanese race. When
you go to Manzanar, there's basically, in my mind, two components of that site. You've got the visitor center itself. It's more of almost like a museum versus what I think of as a traditional national park visitor center.
I think it's a visitor center with a museum.
Okay.
I think that was his intention.
Yeah. So you've got that element at Manzanar, and then you have the grounds of Manzanar, which are expansive, and we'll try to give you a taste for both. So starting in the inside, and that's probably where you want to start your visit, you can tour extensive exhibits that are inside. It's an excellent description of the story of what happened at Manzanar, what happened to the people, from the aspects of the immediate judgment that was bestowed on them from the government, the intense prejudice that happened in society, and the suffering and the sacrifices that were made by the people that were brought to the site.
Yes, and I think what stuck out for me the most was this was not only immigrants from Japan, this was American-born Japanese people.
Yeah, they said there was people who were brought here because they're of Japanese ancestry, but some of them, they've never been to Japan. Some of them maybe, because they've been here for a while, like, second generation, or even some first generation, you start to lose the language. And so the American identity was almost as strong, if not stronger, for some of the people. But because they were connected to the Japanese lineage, off to Manzanar they were taken.
Right.
So it's kind of stunning. There's an account presented at the visitor center from this time that includes many first-hand accounts from people who did spend time at the site. You'll see historical depictions that highlight the propaganda and politics of the day, and there was just so much imagery that we saw that also, I think, helped to bring the situation to light.
So I was standing here at this exhibit called the War Relocation Centers, and there were several of them over the time of this relocation of the Japanese people during World War II. And a gentleman walked up with his two children and pointed and said, this is where she was. And he pointed to Tulare Lake. Then he said to the children, this is where your grandmother was. And he said, just look for something like this. And there's a depiction here of Tulare Lake. So I approached him. And I said, did you have family here? He said, yes, his mother was born at Tulare Lake. And that she was young, and she personally doesn't remember a lot of things, but that the stories from her parents and her family were told all throughout her life. So she shared them with her son. And I thought it was an interesting story, and it's part of the interesting people that you meet along the way.
So we just came out of the visitor center for Manzanar, which had a pretty nice size exhibit that told the story of what happened here.
You know, it's one of those sites you see an example of, you know, the inhumanity that man does to man. It's happens throughout all of history. It happens over and over again. And if we don't stop and remember, you know, what man does, that's a mistake, but we never really seem to correct our mistakes.
So next, on the grounds of Manzanar, is a pretty big footprint here. I think it's like was 1 square mile. So after the visitor center, there's an auto tour that you can take where you drive the perimeter of the property. There's a few buildings that you can go into, so we're going to do that next. See the buildings that you can actually get walk through there, and then the driving tour, and continue learning about this piece of history.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can hear, it is raining, but we've never been afraid of a little water, so we're going to get a little wet.
I think my expectation was we were going to have like a fairly quick-ish tour outside, maybe 20 minutes, half hour, and we spent the next several hours on the grounds, and there was so much to see. So let us take you through some of the highlights of what you can see when you go outside the visitor center here. So you get a chance to step into reconstructed barracks that are on the grounds today to get a glimpse of what camp life was like.
Footprints they have a marked a building. This would be the recreation of building 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and on and on.
And you get in your car, there's a 3.2 mile auto tour where you can view the remnants of orchards, excavated rock gardens and ponds, building foundations, and the camp cemetery. And there's so many stops along the way where I'd recommend stop the car, get out, explore a section, take it in, get back in your car, drive a bit more to the next thing, walk the grounds, soak that in, and keep doing that, and it's going to just bring this place to life for you. And I guess, I mean, theoretically, you could get in your car and just drive the 3.2 mile route and probably be done with it in, I don't know, 10 minutes, 11 minutes or so. Or you do what we did, and we probably were outside in that area at least another 3 hours.
Oh, easily.
And this was kind of a mix of going into the reconstructed barracks that were on there, as well as just some of the areas that were preserved. So this first building after the visitor center that we came to has the story of what it was like in these blocks and how the blocks were managed, what happened here, the activities that those who were at Manzanar participated in, and then this kind of awkward position that quote-unquote block managers were placed in, on the one hand to look after the people, the Japanese who lived in these blocks, while simultaneously being accountable to those who were the administrators of this place. So these were Japanese who were kind of between a rock and a hard place, and that obviously was a very difficult scenario to have been a part of. And then you also learn here about, I think most people here were of some type of Japanese descent. Just the diversity of those people was immense. So on the one hand, you had the American government saying, hey, because you look Japanese, you're going to go here. But among the people that were here, they came from different parts of the country, different socioeconomic backgrounds, some that maybe were here for their first generation, some who were here for, they were second generations, others who had never ever been to Japan. So when you mix that all together, it's not all of a sudden a homogeneous group, even though certain people thought it was. What did Julie learn at Manzanar today?
I learned that we never learn our lessons.
Yeah?
Yes, we never learn. This will happen again.
So there's a bunch of barracks here in addition to the visitor center that you can visit. So we went through those. You've got like a kitchen, mess hall, school. I think the thing that kind of just struck me was like one of the last things that we saw. You were watching this TV monitor with people's stories, and coming into this and going through it, we knew about the incarceration that happened here. We knew that people lost their homes, lost their businesses, lost their livelihoods. There was a gentleman on one of the videos that was talking about what else was lost.
He was very young when he was in the camp, and he explained how one of the losses that was so devastating to Japanese Americans was the loss of their culture.
Yeah.
Because so many of them at this point in time were afraid to be Japanese, and they wanted so desperately to fit into the American life because that's what's been told to them for a couple of years.
Yeah, and he made the point about that they tried to change everything about themselves that they could.
They couldn't change their looks, but they could change the way they thought about their culture and all the things associated with it.
Yeah, and one of the big things he said, and I can relate to this as a first-generation American because it was the same at my house growing up, where parents spoke one language, and partly because of the desire to acclimate, you stop speaking your native tongue. And he made the point, and he referenced the Native American experience, that you lose the language, you lose the culture. Losing a cultural identity is a devastating thing, I think.
Yeah.
So I learned that here, in addition to everything else I knew about this place.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Off to the auto tour.
Let's go take a ride.
There is a baseball pitch on there that we drove by. They had baseball teams, and they'd spend time playing that game.
Swing! Woo, safe! Some got married. So you had marriages. Some died there, and there was funerals.
Which takes us to one of the final places we saw on the grounds was the cemetery. An area that's a sacred space at Manzanar, but today only has 6 graves with remains left there, and families who had deceased people at Manzanar in the years following requested the removal of remains. So many
to be buried with their own families.
Yeah, but there are 6 still there, and the whole cemetery area is still preserved.
And there's a large memorial to them in the center of this cemetery.
And we took quite a bit of time there as well. At one of the turnoffs here, there was a sign for a fish pond. And this is where there used to be a fish pond that was in the community, and I think an example of these types of enhancements that they try to make the most of the unfortunate situation that the people here were in. The pond is dry today, but you can see the outline of it and get an idea. Kind of close your eyes and see what it used to be for them.
They call it Merritt Park. It was a place of beauty and solitude for the crowded, confined community of Manzanar. It had pathways, bridges, lawns, tons of flowers. It was on 1.5 acres, and it lifted the spirits of those internees that came here. One of the internee was a landscape designer by the name of Nishi, who created the park in 1943, and together with a floriculturist, Takmuto, a crew of people started building the park. Nishi dedicated his work to the memory of fellow Japanese immigrants who, although ushered to this place with the breaking of friendly relationships between two countries, have come to enjoy this quiet, peaceful place. It is amazing how resilient people are in circumstances that you would think would break them, and instead they made a community.
I do think about places like this that we have in California, and there's a number of sites that are of such historic significance that I think if you're like a parent, and if you have children who are starting to get immersed in history in school, junior high, high school, if you're able to take a trip to a place like this during the summertime and immerse them in this, I think it's such a bigger learning moment than paragraphs that you read in a textbook. Because, I mean, something like this probably gets, I don't know, it might get a couple of paragraphs, whatever, and then you move on to the next event and the next event, and it doesn't become as real as when you walk on the site and see the images, see where they stayed. Yeah. So it is one of the interesting aspects of history that's been preserved that can still be visited, and I think it's a rich thing to be able to do. Hey, so thanks for watching our travels to the Manzanar Historic Site. We hope you enjoy this video and hope it encourages you to make a visit to this very important place.
And if you liked what you saw, hit the subscribe button below and you can see future episodes of our travels.
And we'll be looking for you at the places where we go.